Hello and welcome to the Powered by Rock Podcast. We're only speaking with Alec Koukol of the Nashville-based indie rock band Safari Room today about their music, their latest album, Complex Houseplants, and more. The band is shockingly unsigned by any record label at the moment. And if it was up to me, they'd be on the radio and touring nationally already. We'll dig into one of Nashville's best rising bands, Safari Room, right after this.
You're listening to the Powered by Rock Podcast with your host, Isaac Kuhlman. The Powered by Rock Podcast was created to help showcase some of the best rock musicians in the world and to pass on to future generations the rock music that has inspired rock fans around the world for decades. We want listeners to be able to hear great stories and life experiences directly from their favorite artists, as well as dig deeper into music theory and talk rock like no other show you've ever heard. This isn't about looking cool, it's about getting real and having a great time. Without further ado, let's start the show.
All right. Hey, and welcome to the Powered Rock Podcast. I always kind of do that really fast. Powered by Rock Podcast. It's like I'm just making it one word now. Super stoked for the show today because I'm going to be speaking with Alec Koukol of the band Safari Room today. I literally found out about these guys because Alec just sent in a music submission, and I was like, all right, I always listen to them. Not always good. Most of the time, the bands that send me stuff is pretty good. Not always, but in this instance, I was actually blown away. I was like, hey, your music's pretty good. What's the deal with the band? And so reached out. Now we're here talking to him. Hey, Alec, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Isaac.
Yeah. So, yeah. There are going to be a ton of people who probably haven't heard of you guys yet. So let's kind of introduce you guys to them right now. So obviously you guys are now based in Nashville, but you weren't all originally from there. How did you, Chris, and Austin kind of join up and form this band in the beginning in the first place?
Yeah, so we all met in school. I was a year ahead of them. We all went to school together, and
this school was in some place
in Nashville.
Near?
Yeah,
okay.
In Nashville. So we all went to school in Nashville, and I'm from Nebraska, Omaha, Nebraska originally. And actually, on the slide or the intro, I saw that you interviewed Tim Kasher, and that like made my heart skip.
Yeah,
that's very.
I'm like
cool.
Wearing all of his shit right now too.
Oh
like,
gosh, yeah, I just was like, oh, Tim. And there's a funny story that I think I have about Tim that I don't even know, but our parents know each other. So long story.
Interesting.
Then Chris and Austin are from the Ohio area. And so we all met there. I was a year ahead of them in front of school, and kind of all friends of friends, became friends ourselves. And I was putting Safari Room together, and there's kind of been a mixed crew since I put this band together 4 or 5 years ago, right after I got out of school in 2017. But Austin and Chris have been almost kind of a through line throughout all that.
Gotcha. And so I think one thing I noticed is that you guys don't seem to have a full-time basis. Is this something that you guys are currently looking for, that you guys currently have, or is it just kind of whoever's available kind of joins you guys on live shows? We're
super lucky. I mean, Nashville is a city that is full of really amazing musicians and really kind people. And so we've been able to tour with our friend Emma Lambiazzi, Connor Gravanovello, Hunter Mulkey, and Cole Yepsen. All 4 of them have been wonderful to tour with. And it just so happens that we don't have a bass player to stick with us at the moment. But I think it hasn't been prescient at the moment. But I think if something clicks down the road, that would be sweet. But I think it's cool in Nashville because everyone kind of has their hands in a bunch of different pies. And so it's kind of hard even to like nail people down for a long-term project.
Yeah. Well, especially when they're in like 10 different bands, because that's how it goes these days, right?
Right. And I think that's interesting, like being the band leader and kind of the hearth, if you will. I definitely kind of struggle with that as far as this is kind of my baby, and I only do one other thing on the side musically, and everyone else does like 6 different things. And I think that's great. It's just, I know that I can't split my brain and keep Safari Room moving at the same pace. So,
yeah. Well, it's like that phrase. It's something like, don't half-ass 2 things, whole-ass 1 thing, or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the project that I'm doing right now on the side has been really nice because it kind of is helping to accentuate and also give me some rest from touring with Safari Room for the moment, while we kind of hibernate and figure out what's next.
Yeah, sure. Now, you seem relatively young. I think you said that you graduated in 2017. So I'm guessing you're mid 20s to early 30s. 27. Okay. Yeah. So
wee young child.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of like, I'm fucking 40 now. I feel like an old man, but it's like the amount of good music out there. It's like, it seems like the wheelhouse is between like 25 and 35 of really good music. And then everything after that is like, it's still good. Like people older, but it's usually the bands that already kind of did something previous, kind of just making new music. So it's very rare I find a really good band that's like 22 years old right now. Some of them, in fact, I'm doing a podcast with another group that are from Vegas who are all in high school and in middle school. They're 15. They're all siblings, 15, 14, and 12. I'm like, holy shit, these guys are really good. But saying that, I mean, obviously you're kind of about a half generation, almost full generation behind me as far as like age wise. What kind of influences did you have when you were writing this music? Because I kind of get some, and you've mentioned some on kind of your band bio and stuff, but kind of explain, if nobody's ever heard of Safari Room, what kind of influences you had.
Yeah, I think one of the big ones, and I think it's very easy to hear, is Death Cab for Cutie is a big influence on me, especially through college. I became a huge fan. I listened to Grizzly Bear a lot. That's another group that I think bleeds into this music.
Yeah.
I brought up Tim Casher earlier. I think Cursive is a big one for me growing up, and trying to think of other bands. I know that Biffy Clyro is my all-time favorite band. I don't write music like those fellas, but at the same time, I can't help but think that I'm like, oh, I want like a big rock sound sometimes. So I think Biffy Clyro is big. And the band Elbow from Manchester, UK.
Okay.
I found a few years ago, and it just kind of became obsessed with their music and just how they how Guy Garvey expresses lyrically and melodically. I think that's been a really big influence for me.
That's quite a range, because actually, I mean, there's a little bit of everything from, that folksy art indie rock to some heavier stuff to, I mean, all over the place stuff. But
like to keep it like a cornucopia.
Yeah, for sure. Have you ever heard of the band The Deer Hunter by any chance? They're based in
but I've
Washington
never listened to them.
Okay.
And
I think you should. And the only reason why is because your voice and your vocal tone and some of the music you guys play. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's like super similar but it's like you guys would be like a great team up. Like if you guys ever played a show together, it'd be like a fucking amazing show.
Well, if the Deer Hunter listen to this right now, here's our submission for consideration.
Yeah, I would highly recommend listening to them. Though their new stuff is like more sci-fi stuff, but the old stuff was more. It's like fiction writing. They're like world creating, but it was more based on like a romantic relationship kind of thing. Or anyway, I digress. But I really get a lot of tones and vibes from your band to their band. But yeah, I definitely get Grizzly Bear. There's a lot of tones with that too.
Right.
I'm not a huge fan of Death Cab for Cutie, so I'm actually kind of surprised that you mentioned that, because in my opinion, you sound a bit more 80s than Death Cab for Cutie in some ways, but also the vocal ability, in my opinion, is not nearly in my opinion, Death Cab for Cutie singer's voice is a bit annoying and high.
I've gotten that same feedback. Someone once said that, and I'm going to offend if Ben Gibbard is listening to this, but someone once said that we're like Death Cab for Cutie if Ben Gibbard was a better singer. And I was like, I was like, thanks, but also like I love Ben. So
yeah.
I think it's funny with like what I'm listening to and what inspires me, and kind of like the output, and also like on that end where it's like, oh, I'm listening to like I don't know, like a band called Russian Circles, which is like an instrumental metal band out of Chicago, and plenty of like Daughters and stuff like that, where I'm listening to things that I don't think I could articulate in a musical output. Whereas, and then I'm getting feedback where it's like we sound like Fleet Foxes, Young the Giant, Local Natives, and I've really never listened to any of those artists. And so it's kind of funny how that all kind of mixes around. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I actually have never spent much time with Fleet Foxes. I've listened to quite a bit of Young the Giant. I mean, there's the genre similar. I wouldn't say you guys sound anything like Young the Giant, though. I don't know, a little bit more poppy on the rock side, and you guys are more rocky on the pop side.
It's kind of like that umbrella of like indie rock, like a very
exactly.
vague indie rock.
Yeah, very cool. All right, so being from Nashville, I can assume the music scene is quite saturated there. I know plenty of bands. How do you feel you guys stand out from kind of some of the rest out there? Because a lot of people have a very similar sound in Nashville. Every time I hear somebody from Nashville, I'm like, okay, that's definitely a band from Nashville, or that's a band from Austin, or that's a band from Chicago. But
yeah, we, especially on the road, we hear like they go, oh, we definitely knew you were from Nashville. Like once you started playing, they're like, bands out of Nashville just sound like clean and precise. And I think I'd never want to go around being like that we are this like completely flawless, fine tooth, like factory made, like vacuum packed rock band, because I think all the bands that I admire don't necessarily operate that way, of this like pristine, clean. And I think Nashville has that. Hear my dog. Nashville has that reputation that like there's kind of there's like an ego, and there's like even like a skill level. And I understand that because of what people come to Nashville to do, but I think sometimes I fear that Nashville has kind of like a snobbish reputation.
Sure.
So I guess as far as that, sometimes I like to forget that we're from Nashville, just because it's like, hey, we're from other places, but we just call Nashville home. It's not that we don't want to be from Nashville. It's just like, would love to stay away from the reputation we can't control.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I was going to say, I think the whole, I get the where you're going with, from like, you know, people jumping to conclusions when they hear the word Nashville band, right? It's like LA band, like, oh, Jesus Christ, here's like a Guns N' Roses ripoff or something. There's like
a reputation that like New York and Nashville and LA have, of like, there's a certain specific ilk of artist or band. Yeah. And as much as possible, I'm like, yeah, we live in Nashville, but like Nashville doesn't define our sound. Yeah. I think there's so many artists and so much music that comes out of here that is kind of counterculture to what people think. And I think Nashville's tricky because it's like Broadway. You think of like the touristy honky tonk Broadway, and like that is not the output truly of like what Nashville has to offer. And there's a lot of like Americana and like folk and rootsy stuff that comes out of here, but like I feel like it's more of a cornucopia. It's more colorful than that.
Sure.
Than just like the Broadway music.
Yeah, and I think there's a nuance in your guys' sound that, like you said, I mean, there's such a good sound that you can get with the talent that, you know, both in town and around Nashville, where you can record, mix, master with really good talent and stuff like that. 100%. And I think because it's so adjacent to a country music scene, and those people are super polished musicians, where like if they put something out, it's like these are like, you know, working with the absolute best producers, the best recording art, like recording sound people and everything. And it's like adjacent to that. And it's like, it's, you know, it's just a step away from that, but it's like, you can get that for like a non, you know, gigantic record label price. So it does sound polished, but it doesn't have to be so fine packaged as you said.
Exactly. And I think like the recording industry is shifting dramatically. I mean, I had a buddy pointed out this way, where it's like, so you have Billie Eilish. I can't remember what year her second record came out.
Yeah, 2019.
Yeah. Like the one with like Bad Guy on it. That won Best Engineering, and the engineering on that record is the two of them on a laptop with a microphone.
Yep.
And so it's like, so that being this like now, like, and I know Grammys aren't everything, but it's like that is such an interesting standard to now set the bar of like, oh, like there were people making music on their computers before and whatnot, but it's this new interesting precedent of like, oh, like music can be made anywhere, and it doesn't even have to be the best sounding music. Not saying that Billie Eilish's music isn't great sounding, because it's fucking unreal sounding.
Yeah.
But it's like you can make a record in your bedroom, and if it hits people the right way, money.
Yeah.
So I think that's such an interesting thing. And when I started the band, I fell into some friendships that were with now my brain isn't working. Started working with some friends who had amazing studios like in the back of their house.
Yeah.
Like professional grade studios, amazing gear, and also owned and run by wonderful humans. And so I think that is also going on while there's people making like $1 million records down the street.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you can do both, or, I mean, it's like, why pay like $1,000 a day for a studio when you can either go to someone else's house and just be around them in cheaper space and with a perhaps more creative freedom? Or I mean, it's what we're doing right now is like, we're recording this next record or whatever it's going to be in our houses. Like, so like I have my studio rig here and our Austin's rig for drums and stuff. And like, we've made 2 studio records in studios, like paying for studio time. And it's like, let's try something different. So,
yeah, it can only be downhill from here, right?
Exactly. And you asked about kind of like where we stand in Nashville. And I feel like that's kind of I can only have kind of an emotional response to that question, because, and the way I'll phrase it is that I think if we wanted to be like Nashville's biggest band and not tour and not focus outside of that, I think that would be achievable. However, my vision is set past that. And
yeah.
so I think like whether we start climbing in Nashville's popularity before or after we start making bigger waves outside is kind of not super important to me. But I think if that happens, where it's like, all right, we're starting to make real big noise outside of Nashville, it's going to be like, oh, well, then Nashville can catch up and like, see what they've maybe been missing out on. So
yeah,
I think
I'll tell you,
it's like I'm treating Nashville kind of like every other city, just because I think it's such a hard market to tap into. So it's like, if we start making a big buzz in Columbus, then like we're gonna try to go play Columbus more, for example, as opposed to like trying to, and like we only play maybe once every 4 months here, just because it's like sardines with musicians. So
yeah. And I was gonna say, I'm not a religious person, but obviously the Bible is something that most people know somewhat about. And even the people from Nazareth, where Jesus was born, didn't believe him to be the Son of God, because he's like, yeah, it's just Joe's little kid. Like, what? Yeah. He's not so special. Like, and then everybody else is like, he's like the greatest gift to God, to mankind. He's the Son of God, but they didn't see it that way.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where I've had to do it that way, because I think there ends up being a lot of like, oh, I'm super bummed that like we're not getting like as much traction here and whatnot. But then it's like, oh, like set your sights further, and it's like, okay, it's just another garden that we're trying to water as we go. So
yeah, very cool. Well, let's jump into the music, because I found the new album Complex Houseplants to be truly excellent from start to finish. One funny thing about it is that after I got all the way through it the first time, I was like, man, the only thing that could make that even better is if they would put some like heavier sound parts into some of their songs. Well, then I went back through it and I was like, oh shit, never mind. Like, I hear it now, because like, how when you first listen to an album, you kind of just listen to kind of absorb it and just kind of like be let the emotion of the album kind of sit in, and you're not dissecting some stuff. And then I go back and I listen to songs like Speak Slower and Garden Talker and there's certain points where just blasting out, and I'm like, holy shit, like that's awesome.
Yeah, those songs pop off. So yeah,
and as I say, they kind of simultaneously, when they do that, it kind of crescendos to where it's like, it almost makes you want to weep, but also punch holes in walls. So it's like, I want to flip a table over, but it's also like, oh, shit's kind of sad.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
It's cathartic. That's what it's. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you kind of know when it's a good time to rock out on a song? Because overall the music's a little bit more subdued than that in tone.
Damn, that's a good question.
Well, I try not to give shitty questions. So.
That's good. Otherwise, it'd be a very long hour.
Yeah.
No, I think if nothing else, I have a tendency to rock out more than I think the rest of the creative entities in Safari Room want to, and
Yeah.
so I think that's them kind of reeling in like oh, this is going to be like a big rock outro, and it's like maybe not. It's like, oh yeah, because we did that 2 songs ago. But I kind of think of like the story of the song. So like, especially you listed Speak Slower and Garden Talker, where Speak Slower is this like, it's like tight and very methodical and kind of spooky and eerie. And it's very complex throughout the whole thing with rhythms and melodies and like descending stuff. And it just feels anxious the whole time because I subtitle that song An Ode to Social Anxiety because that's what it's about. And so I feel like at the end, it feels like the cathartic, just throughout the whole outro. And like, I've been really inspired by Idols, the band from Bristol, UK. And so I'm like, I just like want to just bash my guitar for a minute. And so I feel like that is a good song to like, have it be really, really pent up and then have that cathartic outburst at the end.
Yeah.
And so that feels like, it's like, that's like going with the story. And kind of same with Garden Talker. I think of that song kind of like Fix You by Coldplay. Maybe it's a little too on the nose, but like how the end is just like, you can just feel the Grey's Anatomy outro credits playing as it goes. And so just having that like big open with kind of like the anthemic part.
Yeah.
Feels
it's funny you mentioned Coldplay because I do get some Coldplay vibes from your music at times as well. And I'm like, this is kind of like The Scientist a little bit like this and some of that stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, so like with the end of Garden Talker, it's that kind of bringing it all together, like that whole message. And I kind of feel like Garden Talker specifically, is kind of the culmination of like the whole record, kind of the narrative of that.
Yeah.
We're not that different. And so I think of the similarity of everyone in like the last 2 years, even though we're all trying to like rip each other apart and be as polar as we can. I think that like finding that similarity through basically shared trauma, that's kind of what Garden Talker is for me, of like having that realization, like coming to the top of the mountain and realizing that was like a bigger mountain, but it's like celebrate this one. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, and then I was gonna say, because speaking of celebrating and then kind of having these victories, I talk about, you know, I want to talk about Small Victories because this is like the starting song on the album, or starting song of the album as well. And every time I listen to the album, I'm like, all right, I know it's good, but I can't remember exactly how good. And then I hear that song start. I'm like, fuck me, this is so good. Such a really good song.
Thank you.
And, you know, it seems to be like it's you know, it's got quite a rocking out vibe on that one as well.
Yeah.
But lyrically, it seems to be connected to someone trying to help move past like the daily challenges in life. You know, we won't dive deep on every song, but I am curious about that one, as the lyrics seem to get a little bit more intimate, but not too specific on anything. Can you kind of explain the frame of reference for that song, Small Victories?
Yeah, I think it's just a neediness to get up and move out of stagnancy. And I think we have a song off the last record called Young Water, which is kind of like a happier form of Speak Slower, where it's like, you can do this, you've got this, it's going to be great. But I think Speak Slower more delves into like the darkness of like feeling pent up and like tied down by like the minutia of life, or just not being able to like kind of like even to like get it together and figure out what comes next. So I think
get out of your sweatpants, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's also with the last 2 years, it's like everyone is stuck. And not that the entire record is about being in a pandemic, but I think there was definitely a spark of that idea of like, okay, like I need to kind of crowbar myself out of this situation, and I think it can kind of be transient of like, whether it's like this job, this situation, this relationship, like whatever I'm feeling stuck in, I gotta make something happen. And I think that same like big anthemic hitting of all of our instruments like feels like that breaking out of the door. So
Yeah. And I mean, I think obviously the first album was created before the pandemic. And then the second album obviously was created in that time, but it doesn't feel like a pandemic album. It doesn't specifically say like, oh, you know, I'm dealing with COVID or anything like that. It just is, you get that sense of isolation. And when I was younger, I always remember like anytime an album seemed to come out in the winter or be recorded in the winter, it always kind of had that isolation vibe to it and just made you like really think and like kind of like sulk a little bit. I'm like, man, this is fucking like, it's heavy, but it's like, that's kind of the feeling I get from this. It's not so much like, you know, 2 years of isolation. It's like a season of isolation, a winter kind of thing. And I think it's done really well in that sense of like not specifically saying, hey, you know, we're all in this thing, like, you know, unity and let's all bring it together, but it kind of does in a more nuanced sense. And
I appreciate the word nuance. I was just about to say that. I think I don't like saying like proper nouns almost. Like I don't like speaking directly something. I like to kind of curtail and nuance my songwriting as opposed to just like, for some reason I don't like writing the word like cell phone or like telephone. It's like an object. Like I don't want to talk about this thing. I want to like
I don't want to talk about modern technology because then in 20 years it's going to be outdated.
I want to find an interesting way to talk about that. And so I think that to me is like, I'm not going to be like, this song is called Pandemic Day 34. So it's just like, because that would be a little too on the nose. And I knew like a year into the pandemic that obviously like a bunch of art was going to come out of this.
Sure. And
so I think I didn't want to be amongst a choir of people talking directly to the issue and having a more, and not that that's not a creative way, but like having a little bit more of a nuanced, interesting way to talk about it. And also for it to be, I mean, I like to make music that feels timeless or can transition with people. And so talking about something incredibly specific, you can kind of,
I mean, it's not like you have a big head or anything, Alec. You're just making timeless music that sounds incredibly professional and clean. And
no, I can just, thank you. My ego is doing really well today.
So probably two of my favorite songs, especially off the new album. And you did mention, you know, a couple songs off the last album, but the new album, Best of Me and It Just Takes Time are incredibly good songs. And I'm telling you, like, I literally like almost every song. Like I do like every song in the album, but like the degree of me liking one song over the other is like, man, that's, I don't know, but like those two stand out and I don't really know why, but I know you did I think you did a music video for Best of Me. I don't know if you did one for It Just Takes Time, maybe both actually.
So so we actually did one for It Just Takes Time. We took a camcorder on the road with us.
That's right. I saw that one. Yep.
Like, we handed it to audience members at every show when we played that song. And that was really funny. And we got some weird footage from that. But yes, we did that in kind of like a tour video. I've always thought those are kind of fun, just to like look like on the road. And then Back to Me, we didn't do a music video, but we submitted to like the Tiny Desk concert.
That's right.
We did like a live version at Austin's house. And did that with also like 5 different non-matching cameras. Like it was like 2 iPhones, like a camera and like a shitty digital camera. So I think that like that was kind of just like no one's like sending us money to make a huge music video, and I was like, this is sufficient and it'll be kind of fun. And it's, I think with that, the budgetary restriction, like it almost pays to be a little bit cheeky of like, oh, we know this isn't like the highest quality.
Well, the other thing is that from what I remember is you played it live and it's just like, you know, one take of sound. So it actually sounds incredibly well, or, you know, incredibly good for a live essentially recording.
Thank you. Yeah, that turned out pretty darn well. And like, it was fun to take that song live because it is so piano driven on the record. And so it's like, it's kind of reimagining it in a live setting with just guitars. So. Yeah.
And I want to talk about Best of Me specifically because it kind of gives me that 80s rocker sound like Bruce Springsteen that he kind of made popular. You know, you talked about Americana. I don't ever want to call Bruce Springsteen Americana. That's kind of more like John Mellencamp or John Cougar kind of thing. But Bruce Springsteen has something about like just like the driving force of a song. It just always seems to move forward and just kind of, no matter how you feel like it's going to end up, it just seems to keep driving. And that's kind of what Best of Me kind of feels like to me. And I think it's got the piano and stuff like you said, but first of all, who's playing? Is that you playing the keys on that?
I played the keys on that.
Yeah. So you're not just a guitar player singer, you also play piano.
I also play bass on the whole record except for one song. So
nice. Yeah. So
not to continue to inflate my ego, but so all the keys on the record are me.
Nice. What was it like to kind of pair the music to the lyrics on this one? Because it really does feel like it could explode at any given time, but you kind of rein it in.
That was one where I think we were all super intentional about like, this can't become a big outro or big bridge or something like having the bottom drop out on the choruses was super important to it. Kind of like, it does feel like, oh, this could be so big. Like, why didn't you guys do this? And it's like, well, we've done it on like 6 other songs. Go listen to those.
Tell that to Kings of Leon, for Christ's sake.
Exactly. It's like not every single song needs like this big raucous outro, says the guy who writes songs with big raucous outros. But yeah, I think with that one, it's so compact and personal. It's almost kind of like a note to self. And so to make it bigger than the narrative would feel disingenuous to kind of like the introspection that it's trying to evoke. But yeah, I think that was a fun one to kind of like that. I think that was one of the first ones that we recorded that had piano. And so that felt super special as far as just like venturing out a little bit from the first record and bringing in keys.
Yeah. Is that something that you naturally played over the years, or is something you just kind of started adding on as you started recording?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can see behind me, my thing is mirrored, but I can't. So I'm really confused on which direction.
Yeah.
I got a piano from my job. They're like, yeah, this is just sitting here. And if you can pay to move it, you can have it. So I paid like $300 and I have a piano. And so I got that early in the pandemic because, I was just looking at stuff and I was like, that'd be kind of cool to have at the house. And so I started writing on the piano a lot more. I grew up playing piano from about 5 to 10. And then I dabbled from like 10 to 17. And I took lessons going from like late high school into college and then some in college. But I've always enjoyed how I write on piano differently than I write on guitar.
Yeah.
And it's fun to like take a song that you write on the piano and move it to guitar, and a song you play on guitar and move to piano. You get different ideas spark.
Sure.
But that one felt very much like broody, like a few chords and just like the truth of like, oh, this is really tough right now. And so I think it's like weird to call us a sad song fun, but it was fun to see that one come together as far as just like, oh, this is me branching out into more, I wouldn't say piano driven, but piano centric songs.
Sure. Yeah, it makes sense. And I feel like we've already had a few too many compliments, and I will say I don't often compliment the chops of singers on the show. I'm not sure why, but I think I've only done it like 4 or 5 times where, I've said, hey, you got really good vocals. But I would say your vocals are, like we've talked already, pretty, polished, very clean. You sound like a singer who's been singing for 30 years, but with a young man's tone. And I think that's highlighted incredibly well. And it just takes time. That chorus is so well done. It sounds like a John Mayer with Michael Bublé kind of infused in there, kind of tone.
Kind of that croony, that breathy crooniness. Yeah, exactly.
So it's when I hear it, I literally think it's like, oh, that's John Mayer, Michael Bublé.
If John Mayer was singing it.
So what do you attribute to your vocal tone? I it's always something I'm curious, like how do people learn how to sing like that? And do you ever feel like you kind of have to hide how good your voice is to sound like you're not too professional or overproduced?
Okay. So I have to attribute, remind me about point 2 if I get tangential. I have to attribute a lot of my vocal prowess, I would say, to going to school for music. I was a vocal performance major. And so,
that helps.
I guess. Yeah. I was super inspired to do music in college, and I was going to go go to school for guitar because I was like, I don't see myself doing much else other than playing music. But I knew that I wanted to go to school and also kind of and move away from Nebraska.
Sure.
So
what's wrong with Nebraska?
Nothing's wrong with it. I just need something different. I didn't want to go to another Husker game. That's really it.
Yeah.
And so,
well, they keep losing. That's why.
Right. They haven't been good since Tom Osborne. So, and I'm actually shocked that I just threw out Tom Osborne, but that's truly the last great Nebraska coach. So, yeah, it's not voting. It's like rooting for the Cleveland Browns. And I know that if any Nebraska fans listening to this or does listen to this, they're gonna be very pissed that I said that. But get a better football team going. I digress. So I was going to go to school for guitar originally, and then I had a really, really awesome voice teacher who's since passed, but he encouraged me. He's like, man, like you're doing voice lessons and like you're doing all this stuff at school. Like, why wouldn't you go audition for voice? And I was like, oh, I never thought of that. So I auditioned for voice and got into school music here in Nashville. And really, I think that helped but really accentuate those skills. I think I had a lot of stuff up here that I wasn't able to materialize outside. And so I think having a stronger voice, having an easier flowing voice through 4 years of rigorous training, I think helped to basically whatever I want to hear outside, I can machinate forward. So, and then I guess go ahead.
I was gonna say, it feels, and when you say that, it's actually funny because it's kind of like, when you want to be a painter and you can visualize what you want to paint in your head, but there's absolutely no fucking way you can do it on canvas because your talents are just not there. It's very similar to sound because your ears, because your sound is coming from your own head, sound different. Your sound sounds different to you than what it sounds like to the rest of the world. So it does take a lot of practice to kind of figure that shit out.
Yeah. And I think that's like over the years, that's just how musicians figured out of like, oh, like I have these, like, it's kind of like Brian Wilson. I like remember seeing Love and Mercy and how they like showed how his brain worked in a very dramatic way. But just being able to like agree or not agree, but just be like, oh yeah, I like hear stuff in my head. There are lots of voices, but there's also lots of like music and stuff. And so I think being able to sing better, even like 10% better, allowed me to make those ideas come to fruition, and training for 4 years plus, I think accentuated that even further.
Yeah. And then the second part was, do you feel like you hide that?
Yeah. So it's funny because like, and it's funny how you put those questions together because not that I feel embarrassed or ashamed. It's just like, it's odd to be like, wow, you're such a good singer. I'm like, yeah, I'm trained to do that. And so it's like, it does feel kind of weird where it's like, but at the same time, I feel like that the quality of singing that I want to achieve doesn't necessarily come without like busting my ass for years.
Sure.
And some people just right out of the gate sing like that. And that's amazing. Like some people are amazing at calculus and some people have to work really hard to get it right. And so I think I'm definitely the latter, perhaps there's obviously predisposition or whatever, but I'm like, I really had to work hard to get my voice where it is so that I could do what I want creatively. And so I think, do I feel like I have to hide it? I feel like I kind of try to bury some of the history of it where it's like, oh, if you really want to know, I'll tell you. But otherwise I just am like, oh, thank you so much. Like, I appreciate it.
And I've noticed that usually when somebody gets a compliment, especially like on singing or guitar playing, they're like, oh yeah, no, I think it sounds like crap or whatever. They're like devalue themselves to like try to seem modest, but it's like, you have to know you're a good singer. You have to know you're a good guitar player. You know that, like, you know how hard you worked at it. You've been doing this shit for 15, 20 years. So
absolutely. And so I think, and that's also that same idea is like, I'm trying to do a little bit more self-love and friends around me, we all kind of practice a little bit less self-deprecation. And so, I mean, all of us are trying to like, we'll be the first to like cut ourselves down if like, oh, I sang a bad note tonight's show, or like, oh, I played wrong. And it's like, is anyone really noticing? Like, because it is at such a level of either professionalism or skill, not to like toot our own horn, but like we've been working hard. And so I think, like, call a spade in that way. It's like, hey, if you're working hard and the results are coming to fruition, like, you don't have to sit there and pat yourself in the back until you get a bruise, but it's like, acknowledge that. And I think for me, it's not like you can acknowledge it without being a pompous dick where it's like, well, right, I am a good singer.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, thank you so much, I appreciate it. And like, that's all it has to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think in that song, it just takes time. I think it's it's a nice self-reflection that examines everything from your personality to your life choices and even your upbringing to try to basically figure life out, right? So, and I think the chorus is essentially spelling out that it's just a matter of time before you sort things out. I will say artists especially tend to analyze these things. Musicians, writers, they seem to have a more intense relationship with their inner self, for better or worse. Sometimes it truly makes them crumble. Sometimes it makes them a better person. But do you see your life being made better or worse through your self-examination? Because the music seems to be turning out pretty good.
I think.
Are you a tortured soul, Alec?
For sure. I actually had a conversation with a good friend yesterday where we are basically each other's support group for tortured souls. So that's very prescient that you say that. Yeah, absolutely. I think I am. And that's not like, yippee, like, it is something that I work on and struggle with every day and am doing my best to kind of like keep myself moving. I think depression and anxiety are real, and I like that's all kind of mixed together with, or I guess that chicken or the egg, tortured soul, anxiety, depression. But I think when it's pushed in the right direction rather than just like holding it all in, I think that helps. Where it's like I still have these things that I'm working on. It's a long list, but I think when I can maneuver and fuel my music with that, I think that's kind of feels like a superpower of like, I'm having a really hard time with this XYZ issue. How can I move that into something that's creative that will help me feel a little bit better? Even if it's like moving the dial an inch. Yeah. And I think that's kind of creatives in general. That's why it's like the plight of the creative. It's that overthinking, that overanalyzing. And a lot of times it's good. Like, oh, I have this imaginative like strength, but at the same time, like that can get overworked really quick or run too far, run too fast. And then I'm kind of spiraling. And so I think when directed appropriately, it's healthy. So,
yeah. And I didn't actually have this question written out, but this is something, I've written, I don't know, 100 songs over the last 20 years or so. And have performed a couple of times some of the songs. Now, one of the songs in particular, it's called Astronaut. It's kind of a dual song where I wrote it about an astronaut going to outer space after having a argument with his wife and kid the day before, goes up into space, doesn't come back, crashes upon reentry. And like his last thought was like the day he met her or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's actually an allegory essentially, or an analogy of my dad's life, who wanted to become a pilot, couldn't because he had kids when he was like 18. So every time I sing it, like I kind of get a little teary-eyed because I'm like, I know what it means to me personally, even though it has no clear reflection of to what the lyrics mean or say. Sure. I was just curious, like, did you ever have something like that where you're kind of just like, shit, this is hard to kind of perform? You kind of like tear up a little bit every time you do it.
Yeah. There's a few actually Safari Room songs that, depending on the day, are hard for me to play. What is this? Myths, the last song on the record. Yeah. I almost kind of can't get through rehearsals even. Like there was, I think, rehearsal before we had our album release show back in May. And I remember just like kind of breaking down, and it was just like everyone was like very comforting and welcoming, and there's
Yeah.
lots of love. But it's one of those
They
things.
weren't just standing there like, well, this is awkward.
What a weirdo! Look at that guy in touch with his feelings. No, I mean, and I think that's kind of the support that we all give one another, is that like being willing to be vulnerable, because I think music is a big part, vulnerability. And I think especially with lead singers and whatnot, the person who's delivering the lyrics, it is that vulnerability. And so I think letting myself kind of get right to the edge without going over and like becoming kind of a mess on stage. But yeah, I actually think we performed that there, and then I think we played it in Omaha, and for some reason that it really got me there, just because I was seeing a lot of like friends and family, and we started to kind of cultivate a cool audience there, and I think that hit me kind of hard. And then I'm trying to think, Glass Box is another one that over the years has kind of taken to be a different message. Glass Box is off our first record. I actually wrote it even years before that. We put it was on an EP that the band put out very beginning of like 2017, and so I wrote it about kind of just general loneliness. And then 2018, I had a friend overdose, and he and I shared a lot of sentiment about kind of the darkness, loneliness, all kind of stuff like that. And it was right around the time that I was like, oh, I think Glass Box needs to be on this record. I want to re-record it. And it kind of was like, all right, that's for Drew. And so that song kind of, since I kind of merged the narrative with his being, has been kind of hard for me as well. But yeah, so so definitely there are songs out there, and I even think songs that I'm writing right now, I'm like, shit, I don't know how I'm gonna perform that line. So.
Yeah, and you know, it's kind of the real projection of catharsis, right? So like when you're trying to get through your own emotions, sometimes the emotions win, and it's just weird, and you don't even know when it's going to happen. It just pops out. Yeah,
and I think that's kind of just allowing myself to be emotional. And I think, not that I've ever just been like a emotionless robot, but I think being an artist, being a creative, and just being a human, I think we're going through a very interesting time in humankind where vulnerability and being open and emotive are important, because it's like after we're coming off of like 2 years of not being, like everyone not being well, and lonely and stuff, like kind of getting back together and being patient and kind with people is important, especially when they're not in the best headspace. So well, let's talk about the future, because it's not the too distant future. You are working on essentially potentially an album number 3. You've written the last 2 albums in basically a span of 3 years. So you've got 2 albums and a third one on the way. First of all, how the hell do you have so much time to write all these songs? Secondly, what can we expect from this new album, or whatever it might be, and what may be similar and different to the previous albums? Yeah, absolutely. I kind of move in a constant forward motion. So I think I just make time. I find time.
You don't have any kids though, right? That's
I don't have any kids. I just have a very ornery hound dog. So I think, and I have a full-time job, and so obviously that's tricky with time. But I think when I feel the muse, I run for it. I think sitting on my keister for 2 years during COVID, I think I wrote a ton, and we're even polishing off some songs that were kind of songs that we toyed with putting on the last 2 records. And so it's like everything is fair game when it comes to like the next wave of music. I know that.
So the next thing is just going to be a whole cover album, right?
Exactly. We're actually thinking about putting a cover on this next record. So I always am hesitant to do that because I'm not sure, like, it's like, well, don't you want to listen to like the band's music?
Yeah.
But I see so many artists do it so eloquently that I'm like, that could be fun. Or if nothing else, just like put it out as a single.
Well, I mean, if you just think about this, Limp Bizkit wouldn't have had a career if they didn't cover Faith. So
right. And then there's like, I mean, I think one of the biggest examples is Hurt, like
the
9 Inch Nails song that Trent
Johnny
Reznor
Cash.
basically like, yeah, Johnny Cash, it's your song now. That's fine.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you did it way better than we ever could have. So I think that's such a cool thing. Not that I have any expectation for us to have that happen. But it's it's not an Arctic Monkey song. It's a Last Shadow Puppets song. Sweet Dreams, Tennessee. And so I'm like,
Gotcha.
I did it a long time ago in school, and I thought it was kind of a fun song. We'll see. I don't know if that'll happen.
Yeah.
But
Well, it's always nice to save it for live shows too, and kind of slip it in there as a surprise.
and it's like not even like lyrically like Safari Room. Like it's just like very sultry and like kind of derogatory, and like not in like a offensive way, but it's just kind of like, oh, this is overtly about sex.
Yeah.
And like the Safari Room lyrics are not about sex at all.
Yeah.
So it's like it could be kind of
Might as well throw in some Nelly lyrics or something.
Yeah, it's like something a little bit funny, or like do like Naughty Girl by like Beyonce or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, so we're working on what comes next. I kind of put together about, I think it started as like 30 songs that were like either fully demoed or partially demoed, and that kind of whittled down to like 18. As of today, we have 6 that are fully demoed and 1 that we have started fully tracking. And more on the way. It's kind of funny. I'm working with Cole Yepsen, the guy who produced our second record, and alongside us, and played bass on the road with us a decent amount last year and this year. Not last year, just this year. Yeah. So he and I are kind of working as the creative like center and bouncing ideas off of him, and then bringing those to Chris and Austin to add more instrumentation and flesh them out further. And so
Sure.
it's kind of fun to like allow someone else to be the sieve, unless I'm like certain a song is going to be on the record or in this batch. And so he's kind of like, all right, so we'll whittle them down to from 30 to 18. And then it's like, all right, well, I have all these voice memos that I've never really put into like session files and demoed out. And he's like, well, there's a lot that I like here. And I'm like, cool. So like, we'll run with those. And some of them are songs that I wrote 2-3 years ago, where like he played one for me and I was like, I don't even remember writing that. So
Yeah.
it's kind of fun to like go back and like brush the dust off of stuff, because it's like, oh, I don't even remember writing that. And I can approach it with a totally fresh set of eyes and ears. And I think I like doing that, writing something and then allowing myself to forget about it, because then I can come back and judge more pragmatically or emotionally, rather than be like, oh, this is amazing, or like, oh, this totally sucks.
Yeah.
Because usually like the day after writing something, I'll listen back and be like, I don't know how I feel about this.
Yeah.
But giving time and a little bit more kindness, it's like, yeah, that one doesn't really work, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done the same thing where I'll look back on some of the songs that I've written. I'm like, I don't remember this.
Yeah.
It's fucking way better than I remember it, but I don't remember writing any of
It's
this.
finding like old gold that someone buried, and then you realize it's like, oh, that's my time capsule.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of fun. And like I've got like voice memos and like notebooks and like all that kind of stuff of like I can just kind of pick through. I think I'm lucky in that way of my own writing lack of structure, I suppose, whenever it hits. But yeah, so people always ask me, they're like how do you like write a song? And it's like it's truly just chaos. Like I can write it like from like starting with the drums, or I can like write it and then pick it up 3 years later. So I think it's however it crosses the finish line and feels good is like good with me.
Yeah. And so are you guys going to be playing any shows for the rest of the year? Or are you guys going to just be kind of focused on more recording?
I think the main focus is recording. With Austin and Chris having their hands in pies, they're out on the road a lot. And so Cole and I'll be working pretty closely and kind of catch them when they're back in town and knock out parts, kind of just a big chart to-do list for the next 3-4 months and see how far we get.
Nice.
As for playing shows, I'm itching to play, I think, one more show before the end of the year. I'm eyeing kind of like October or early November and just do kind of like a big blowout at a venue here in Nashville. And I mean, if something comes up, hell yeah, we'll do it. I think it's just like we toured so aggressively last year. We played 30 shows within the span of like 5 months, which I feel like for an indie band our size is a lot. And especially during COVID, it was a lot. We did about 20 shows in about 4 months early this year. And I think just with like COVID restrictions and like shows getting canceled because of that stuff. And like, it just, I was happy to not schedule more shows for the time being, just to kind of let this play out a little bit more. And I think general fatigue is a real thing, and self-care is important, which I've just found out as of recently, that's a good thing to do. And so
it's weird that people have been talking about it for like 5 years, and it's like,
you have to take care of your body and your mind. It's like give out from underneath you. But yeah, so I think I find recording and writing to be super replenishing. And so I think after kind of a year and a half of me just doing the business part and like getting us out on the road and promoting music and stuff, it's nice to be like, okay, we don't need to be like out and just hibernate, do what we need to kind of keep the general buzz going and really just kind of set up foundation for a big next swing. So
yeah. And I know you did release a live album as well, which is out there on the streaming platforms as well. We'll add some links to the music, all the music to the show, show in the show notes below the episode. I always say in the show below the notes. I'm like, it's like people a brain teaser.
If you've gotten it wrong every time, people know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. Like, oh yeah, I just have to look below this episode. That's what he's trying to say.
Oh, good.
But do you have anything else that you want to kind of mention or plug or shout out to anybody before we go?
Today? I mean, our music, like we may not be incredibly active like at this moment, but like our goal is to open up the doors, let people into the house. And like, I'm so grateful that like you enjoyed it enough to have me come on here. And we've had lots of cool conversations off mic. And so I think that's so cool to think that, yes, like the music still does resonate, even if it didn't just come out. Yeah. And it is still pretty young of being 4 months old. So yeah, if you're interested in indie rock, then what a week. Yeah, I think it's great music that I think will move you in a certain way. So yeah, we got basically 2 records, 2 EPs, and a live album that's of the whole first record.
So if you're looking to binge listen to something, you know, instead of watching the next Game of Thrones prequel or whatever, you can just listen to all the Safari Room stuff.
Exactly. Are you watching that?
No, I never even I literally never watched Game of Thrones. I watched one episode because my roommate at the time, because we were basically having my wife's cousins stay with us while their house was getting built. They were like, oh, you got to watch it. And they put on the first episode and I was like, this is fucking boring. Like, I love Lord of the Rings. I'm watching that one. Like, that one's good to me. Like, I was just like, this is boring. Like,
yeah, I've heard Lord of the Rings.
I'm not a big fan of incest either. So like,
it's a weird way to end a first. It's a weird way to end a pilot to a show.
Yeah.
And then push a kid out a window.
Yeah.
Because he's going to tattle on you. Yeah, I'm not watching the
spoiler.
Yeah, whatever. If you haven't seen the first episode of Game of Thrones by now, I think you deserve like something got spoiled with Sopranos for me the other day. And I've never seen it, but I was kind of like, serves me right for not seeing Sopranos yet. It came out.
Yeah, it's only been 10 years since the last episode or something. Yeah.
So, but I think like, and even with the Lord of the Rings, I'm kind of like, it's cool. I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings fan, but I've heard it's beautiful to watch.
Yeah. No, for me, it's just because my dad used to read us those books when we were kids. Like, it's just like seeing it now, it's like, oh man, this is like way cooler than I even imagined when I was a kid. Like I could see it, but I couldn't visualize the whole world in any setting. It's like too massive to try to put into your brain.
Yeah.
So that part's cool. But yeah, I don't know, Game of Thrones, whatever. Like I don't need all the sex and conquest of like the love triangles and stuff. I'm like, I don't give a shit about any of that stuff. Like,
right. I just want
show me the tensions between tribes and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Like the big politics of it all, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, that show went off the rails, and they did not want to watch whatever comes next. But yeah, instead of binging that, binge listen to Safari Room, and also all of Powered by Rock's previous episodes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go listen to the one with Tim Casher. That makes me really excited.
Oh yeah, hell of an interview. I love that guy. Like he's super gracious too. I can even message him every once in a while. He'll message me back. I'm like, oh shit, thanks.
Oh shit. I guess we're
like this. We're like best brothers now.
Well, can you put a good word in? I'd love to tour with Cursive.
Well, I will say that I have submitted you guys to 15 Passenger, which is the label for Cursive, and to Saddle Creek. So we'll see if anything comes back.
I grew up listening to artists on Saddle Creek. So you just made my damn day. That's very kind of you.
We'll see if they say anything. I was going to surprise you when they actually reply and go, they're fucking shit. No.
If they do, send that to me, and I'm going to blast it on socials. Be like,
got rejected by my heroes.
Is dog shit. And like somehow like there's always love on the other side where it's like, oh, people are like, no, you're great, and it's like you just like give them like hate and they respond with love.
Yeah, exactly.
But
one last question before we sign off today. What new music other than Safari Room would you recommend people check out?
I actually have been just immersing myself in new records today. Madison Cunningham has a new record called Revealer, and it currently may be my favorite record of the year.
Nice.
I'm a few songs into Def Cab's new album. It is heavier hitting than I think any of their previous records. I always preach the gospel of Idols. They put a record out last year. If you don't listen to them and you like punk music and like love and kindness, you should listen to them. Bartees Strange put out a phenomenal record.
Farm to Table.
This year. Yeah, I mean, just
incredible.
Fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
And so I
have a feeling he might win a Grammy or two for that one.
Yeah, I think so. Grammys don't matter, but he deserves them. I think it's just such a beautifully crafted and like honest record, and I really enjoy his kind of style. It feels very fresh and unique, and not something that I thought would necessarily be like as popular as it is. And that's not saying anything negative about his music. It's kind of a comment on what is popular music. And
I feel like he's like a good mix between like George Ezra and Childish Gambino.
Absolutely.
It's
absolutely. And it's just really cool music. And he sings and plays like a motherfucker. So like I'm so impressed by that record.
Yeah.
God, there's so many.
Well, you only needed to name one, so you're good.
Oh, perfect. I can get my phone out and list them. We'll put it in the show notes. All Alex.
Holy fuck! How many things do I got to look up now?
Hell yeah.
No, I want to thank you so much, Alec, for being here. Obviously, Alec from Safari Room for being on the show. It's been an awesome conversation. Guys, make sure you go to the show notes below this episode. Got it right this time, because you're going to see some of the music, the links, all that stuff there. And make sure to check it out, because these guys are going to be blowing up in the near future, I have a feeling. I think it's only a matter of time before you start hearing more of Safari Room and more about Safari Room. And if this is like the precipice or the first starting point or the catalyst or something for that happening, that makes it even better. But just remember, guys, the Powered by Rock podcast is powered by our listeners. So if you want to show us some support, please be sure to subscribe and share the podcast on social media. You can also make a donation to the podcast to help us keep making awesome episodes with awesome guests. It's not required, but everything is obviously welcome. You can find that link in the notes as well. You can see the full video interview on our YouTube channel and Spotify now as well, because hell, we just put everything up on video now. If you want to check out some of our articles, album reviews, lists, and interviews, go to poweredbyrock.com to read our absolutely free rocking blog. Also, you can find our merch and gear so you can pick up some items to play and look like a rock legend. That's our show for today. We'll see you soon for the next episode. Until then, rock on.
supposed to be